The Longing by Studio Zeus and the independent developer Anselm Peter was released in 2020 during the lockdown. I first played it when it came out, but for various reasons I set it aside, and then about 2 years later I returned to it and completed it in August 2022, and this game is something that I find myself often thinking about. It's perhaps my second favourite game, the first being Gorogoa. The player controls a diminutive character, the Shade, a lonely creature serving an elderly king. After the king falls asleep to regain his powers, the Shade is tasked with awakening its master after 400 days. 400 days of real-time gameplay. This game is an idle game. There is no set purpose. You can either wait for the king under the mountain to awaken, or you can escape if you so desire. The concept for the game came about when Anselm was hiking in Barbosa Cave in East Germany in the Kaifhauser Hills. Some of you might be aware of the Kaifhauser legend that states that there was a cave that was home to an old king who slept inside for hundreds of years, and there's a related poem in the literature mentioning a dwarf who kept checking in on the king once per century to see when and how he would awaken. The Longing serves almost as a cultural landmark. As I said before in the introduction, it was initially released during lockdown. I believe it even came out. It even was published in March 2020. So exactly when the lockdown was occurring, the first major lockdown, when the world was becoming aware of COVID-19. It's just an interesting artifact in that way, kind of on a more surface level. People were drawn to The Longing. It almost reflected our situations at the time, stuck indoors, having little to do, trying to find ways to preoccupy our time. But I also want to bring your attention to some thoughts by the philosopher and cultural theorist Byung-Chul Han. Byung-Chul Han is a theorist that you might be aware of from my channel in various ways. The importance of wounds and the importance of the thing in modernity. But I want to actually focus on the burnout society, Han's notion of the burnout society. He essentially describes a movement of the control society from imposed discipline to one of internalized self-exploitation, and that is the paradigm that we're living in now, the neoliberal paradigm. The modern individual is seen as an achievement subject. We always have to strive and optimize and produce. If our work isn't seen, if what we're doing in the world isn't seen, we're not really living. And I have to admit, I suffer from that as well. I suffer from that internalized neoliberal way of looking at things. The society that Han is talking about is one that is of speed and efficiency, hyper-productivity, constant connectivity, burnout, anxiety, fatigue. And because of this, time becomes something to exploit, not inhabit. I would suggest that The Longing offers resistance to this way of thinking, this way of life. So as I say, the game unfolds, or can unfold. There are multiple endings, different ways to play this game, over 400 real-time days. It takes more than a year to potentially complete this game. But there's no rush toward a goal in a typical way that a typical game might have you progress through levels, acquire gear, always striving to achieve that next thing. There's no rush at all. You can actually, in The Longing, you can actually just sit still in a chair and watch time go by. The game continues running even when you're not playing. So if you wait 400 days, the king will awaken, and that is one option. The game encourages players to inhabit slowness rather than conquer time. But in the burnout society, time is itself a resource. In the longing, it becomes an experience. Relatedly, there's this acceptance of simply doing nothing, just being. The shade can sit, wait, read books even. There are books in this game that you can read, primarily texts that are in the public domain. I believe the Iliad is part of the longing. Various texts, I think War and Peace even, which kind of takes on a comical overtone in the context of longing. It's such a long book that it's certainly a way to while away the time. But you can simply stare into space without penalty. Non-productivity isn't punished. It's really, in the longing, it's a default state. In the burnout society, however, in the neoliberal paradigm, we feel a sense of guilt for idleness, whereas the longing affirms it as idleness is something meaningful to us. Solitude and contemplation is something that the longing tries to instill in the player, as opposed to the burnout society's focus on over-connection, hyper-connection and distraction. But of course, connection in the neoliberal paradigm with social media and the content mill and so forth, it's not really connection, it's a sense of distancing. Relationality is diminished, flattened. In the longing, there are no there's no means of talking to anyone else, there's no external communication, there's no social feedback loops. The game fosters a sense of introspection. You're forced to be alone with your own thoughts, and that can be difficult for some people. Where society nowadays values constant engagement, the longing embraces solitude as restorative. There is no gamification of progress either. There's no achievements, there's no rewards that you can unlock, typical of most game systems and modern AAA games. It's a very slow, Spartan environment. It's a very slow, measured environment, very Spartan environment. You're wandering through these seemingly infinite caves, watching moss grow. There's even a point in the game where in order to cross a gap, you have to wait until water droplets form a pool that you can swim across, and this takes days of real-time waiting. And on that point, exploration is aimless and open-ended. It's an invitation, not a command. Rather than gamifying time, the longing, we could say, lets it breathe. And in the longing, time acceleration reflects enrichment, not exploitation. And so going back to this idea that collecting things, reading things, speeds up time, which is a core mechanic of the game, the only mechanic in the game. You could argue that this is a form of, it's part of that capitalist exploitative mindset. You can actually go out and mine crystals, which takes a very long time. You can take those back into your lair, your domain, and that will actually increase time, the flow of time. But we can actually argue instead that doing that, or reading a book, or painting, or playing music, these are all different aspects, these are all different activities in the game, actually causes time to feel faster, not in an exploitative sense, or a linear sense, quantitative sense, but more qualitatively. It's richer time. It's not capitalist optimization, but existential harmony with place and moment. It's resonant rather than being purely efficient. You could almost argue that because the Shade, this lonely little character, he's not grinding for anything, he's simply dwelling. When he's collecting these items, growing moss or finding books or carpets or anything to enrich his life, he's actually engaging with the philosophy of the thing that creates duration. It's the meaningful object. So the mechanics actually deepen the experience of time rather than reduce it in terms of productivity. So having talked in fairly broad terms about the contrast between the neoliberal paradigm, the burnout society, and the longing. I just want to bring it back to more personal details now. There's a special moment in the longing that always makes me smile, and I always come back to it. It's a source of inspiration. So just as in Gorogoa, there's a moment where the player can shift a gateway or an archway, a doorway, across the panel towards a wall, and this creates an opening for the boy, the child protagonist, to walk through into Enchanted Garden. In the longing, just at the very start of the game, the player ascends slowly a stairway and meets a closed door. And something about this opening to the game, it almost raises goosebumps, because it symbolises so much, not only the power of the threshold and crossing over to this other side, to this expansive cave system. It makes you wait. The doors slowly creep open. For anyone that isn't used to contemplation, introspection, waiting, it could feel very... It's a challenge, it's a form of resistance. The slow opening of the doors tells you, no, you will wait. And once you pass through, tread slowly, think. So the game forces you to be alone with your thoughts and really soak in the dense atmosphere of the caves. And I do think often that are such games necessary, since one could obviously argue that it's always more important to be outside in nature, and that's where true contemplation is really cultivated. But if someone, I would always argue that, using my philosophy and outlook of beyond the given, I would always argue that any experience, even if it's a digital experience, if thought of in the right way and engaged with in the right way, will let someone see a different way of seeing and being. Someone is actually forced to slow down and actually move to care for not only the shade, but the environment itself. And it can only be a good thing. It forces the player to engage with life and time in a different way. And this brings me on to something that I love. I don't think many people have really touched upon, is the quiet sense of natural history, of care that is brought about by so many elements and activities and events in this game. You can befriend a spider, you can grow mushrooms, collect moss, you can watch, again, water dropping and slowly creating that pool over time to cross the gap. It's, for someone that isn't used to this sort of thing, it's almost a gateway to a different type of perception. And speaking of more personal elements, the game for me is fascinating because it's tied up with so many characters that I've written in my short stories. There's actually a novella that I once tried to write called Moat the Dweller. This young boy called Moat who lives in a cave system. I actually wrote this novella about half a year before The Longing came out, which is fascinating. It feels fateful in a way. It's about the society of silent dwellers in this cave system who are trying to escape from the cacophony above the surface. It also reminds me of a little character I wrote in a short story several years ago now called Comb of the Many Silences. This creature in many ways lives like the longing, lives like the shade, but above ground. But in the story he travels through the forest, through the wilderness, and meets an army on the road, going somewhere to conquer, and a trumpet is sounded, and Comb of the Many Silences is blown away. Really a commentary on noise and cacophony and striving, as opposed to the diminutive, the small, the careful, and so forth. So just moving on to the design of the game and the art style, first of all. I love the simplicity of the Shade's character and the rustic feeling of the cavernous environment. Although I will just say that I wasn't as much of a fan of the character designs. bit later on in the game, near the ending in particular, a bit too cartoony for me, I think. But other than that, it's such a somber art style. Which brings me on to the music. The music is very unique in that it takes various tracks from dungeon synth artists. Dungeon synth is a obscure genre of music that I've been listening to for a fair while now. It draws on fantasy literature, old RPG games, tabletop RPG games, as well as computer role-playing games, pagan mythology, and some metal influences as well. And I've often listened to the Longing soundtrack. It's become so familiar now. In fact, the connection with Dungeon Synth makes me respect the game more, in that it really is. This game feels like a challenge to modern, action-oriented, hyper-distractive games. So the game's style, its music, its art, it's very gloomy and pensive, and indeed there is a moment I'll just briefly mention that the player has to make a very important choice about the life of the Shade. But ultimately the game is very... I think sincerity permeates throughout the game. I think part of that is because it makes you sit down and contemplate. But also, on a kind of a more surface level, the character of the Shade is very likeable. He has all these different thoughts about being lonely, and he voices his... He calls a rock his friend and a spider his friend, and it's something that I always love in any type of media. This character, he's portrayed very... He is extremely likeable, and you can very much grow attached to him. This is not a detached game full of macho characters, and there's no cynicism involved whatsoever. It might be dark at times, but there's no toxic cynicism. There's no irony involved, and that it makes me think that The Longing is just another game out of many where there's this mix of the positive and the negative, light and dark. And I think all the games that I enjoy partake of these two different modes. So we'll just end by saying that although I love The Longing, and I think about returning to it and playing it in different ways each time, but I'm not sure if I played The Longing correctly. Without giving spoilers, well, one option is that you can actually complete the game in far less time than 400 real-time days. In fact, I completed The Longing in about 11 days. And that's because I actively tried to explore the caves, this cave system. But I think because the game it's touted as being a game that you can complete only in 400 real-time days, I feel like the game should not have allowed me to do that. I wanted to actually spend more time, even though I actively strove to explore the cave and to escape, in many ways abandoning the king. I wish the game actually didn't let me do that, because I felt like I could have had more time with it. I almost stumbled onto the ending, which maybe wasn't the best ending to have. Maybe I feel like it should have allowed me to almost lock me into the caverns for a longer period of time. So I did wish that it could allow me to actually almost stay in the caverns and explore this world more fully. But that also just allows me to go back to the game perhaps, and soon even. I often think about playing The Longing again, or just letting it actually run for more than a year, just actually really inhabiting the Shade's character and being a part of the caves. But I hope that was informative, and I'm sure that the people who watch The Other Side will appreciate The Longing. Till next time everyone, thanks for watching.